the mini camp is not all that different than the OTAs at all. It's just a progression throughout the spring where they get increasingly more 11 on 11 stuff. Maybe it gets a little bit faster as the spring goes on. This was baby steps in the off season, talking about evaluations of players, much more easy to evaluate quarterbacks and wide receivers and defensive backs and safeties, and pads will go on. It'll get more violent. It'll get faster. It'll get more real.
49ers just wrapped up 2 practices, Tuesday and Wednesday. We're recording this on Thursday morning, and 49ers go quiet. Finally, the end. That's the end of the offseason, folks, unless something dramatic happens while everybody is gone for the next, 6 weeks, basically, 40 days?
40 days.
They reconvene in late July for training camp, and the season will have basically begun by then. Barrows, after those 2 days, they also practiced yesterday. What are you taking from just the minicamp? We'll go over the whole offseason too, but just those 2 days, talking to the players, talking to the coaches. What did you get from that? What's your main couple things out of minicamp?
Well, as you were talking, I remembered I have to bring up to you that they did some things with the new field.
Oh, boy.
So we'll talk about that at the end. But as far as the minicamp, first of all, let's put it in perspective. The mini camp is not all that different than the OTAs at all. It's just a progression throughout the spring where they get increasingly, more 11 on 11 stuff. Maybe it gets a little bit faster in the spring as the spring goes on. So this was the culmination of the spring. Obviously, in training camp, the pads will go on. It'll get more violent. It'll get faster. It'll get more real. So this was, baby steps in the off season. When we're talking about evaluations of players, much more easy to evaluate, quarterbacks and wide receivers and defensive backs and safeties and those types of players than it is the guys in the trenches, because they're not wearing pads, they're not hitting, they're not even really thudding their opponents in these practices. So I hope everybody kind of is thinking about that as we discuss these players. But I do think that some of the training camp battles started to kind of crystallize during the spring, and I think one of the better ones is weak side linebacker, because we finally saw from D. Winters what I think the 49ers have been looking for. We're looking for last year, which is him really using that speed and feeling confident and being aggressive with it. He looked lost at times last year. He looked on point this spring, which sets up a really nice competition between him and Nick Martin, the 3rd round pick, who also looked good, who worked with the second team unit. Most of the rookies worked with the second team. You don't expect a rookie to be a quote unquote starter in the spring. You do expect some of them to work up towards the starting first string by the end of the summer, however. So that'll be a really interesting one to watch come July and August.
Yeah, I mean, it's time for D. Winters to do it, right? He doesn't do it this year. It's probably not going to happen. At least get yourself a spot as the 3rd linebacker and compete for the 2nd linebacker. We know the strong side linebacker does not play maybe 50%, maybe even less than 50%, given the they go 3 wide out so often. But if you're the 3rd linebacker, you got a real good chance to be the 2nd linebacker. If you're not the 3rd linebacker, you're kind of on your way out. I don't know. Tatum Bethune can beat him out. Minor question here, but I'm not sure who's the backup Mike now. Flanagan Fowles used to be when Warner would go out. So who's kind of the back? Who's the other green dot? Who calls the defense if Warner's out, not in the game?
Well, it was Tatum Bethune in the OTAs and minicamp. Chaz Surratt is more of a special teams guy that they brought over from the Jets, but because he was with the Jets, he knows that defense, and he was the second team Mike linebacker. And then there's been talk that certainly Nick Martin, is capable of that role from a mental standpoint, from a communication standpoint. I don't know if they're going to thrust that on him as a rookie. They certainly did Fred Warner back in 2018. But I think down the line, he's somebody that they might look at should Warner have to leave the game, if there's a blowout one way or another, Martin could come in and do that. But I think for now he's concentrating on that weak side role.
Yeah, I think one thing I was looking at, just because there's vacancies with Ayuk, theoretically, we know he's not going to be healthy to start camp. We don't know if he's going to be healthy to start the season or when it's going to be. With Juwan Jennings not out there, working through something, Ricky Pearsall's not out there, like not sure who's going to play in these preseason games and leading up to training camp, which gives opportunity to Jacob Cowing in his second season. I thought he looked fine. Jordan Watkins, we've talked about, the rookie receiver, maybe less explosive maybe in the minicamp than we saw in OTAs. It's hard to tell again. But like those guys are going to play, right? Some of those guys are going to play in the regular season. And you mentioned Cowing in your article today as somebody that might have figured out some things just going into his second season. We know some things that I thought he looked okay as a rookie, but Shanahan was not going to play him. Like clearly did not play him for extensive periods of time. Was going with Ronnie Bell, was going with other guys. Maybe he gets into that mode. Like they need him to play. I think they need. And they could really use Ricky Pearsall to play. We don't know if he's going to play. Like they need some of these guys are going to play downs in the regular season. Certainly in training camp, they're going to get a lot of reps, and in preseason. And then I just think they don't know who's going to be healthy. They don't know exactly who they can count on. What did you see from Cowing specifically in the minicamp?
Yeah, I mean, you talk to people about who's looking good this spring, and Cowing's name always popped up on that list, and Purdy commented on it publicly, and Shanahan did too. Shanahan basically said, I don't know if anybody had as productive an off season as Jacob Cowing. Shanahan is always looking for wide receivers to drive defensive backs off the ball to create space, and he's always looking at their lower body. What are their legs doing? Are they putting pressure on the defensive back and sort of creating that separation that the quarterback wants? And I can only, I'm not good at figuring out whether guys are doing this or not, doing this to Shanahan's standard or not. Shanahan's very high standard when it comes to this. But that's my guess on what was lacking with Jacob Cowing last year. He maybe didn't do a lot of NFL-style route running at Arizona. He was more gadget play guy. And basically, he needed to work on that. And that's something that Purdy mentioned, coming in and out of breaks more sharply. My guess is that he's just doing that better. And that's when you kind of can utilize that speed. If you're a 4.3 something guy like Jacob Cowing is, and you don't have to really throttle down as you're making a break, that puts a lot of pressure on a DB who runs, 4.56 or 4.4 or something like that. Leaves them in a bind. So I think I definitely saw him doing more down the field stuff than I recall him doing as a rookie last year. And the 49ers, trying to target him deep downfield. So you got two guys, Cowing and Jordan Watkins, who you mentioned, who have that deep speed that can really open things up for themselves and for, Brandon Ayuk across the middle, Ricky Pearsall, Juwan Jennings, George Kittle. I think it's a real asset to have those guys active. I don't know what that's going to mean for the regular season. Somebody asked me in a mailbag today, what's the real deal with Watkins? Is he really kind of pleasing Kyle Shanahan? Is he a legitimate guy to get catches during the regular season? And I'm answering it the same way. It's that I'm not quite sure he's delivering that lower body torque that Shanahan's looking for, and that is probably the reason why he's so hard on rookies. But he was productive in the spring, and he looked really smooth. So if anybody can do it, I'd say Watkins has a nice shot.
Always funny when we get spiky Kyle and was asked
Yes.
other day, like, is this the most speed you've had in a receiver group? No. It's like, and I thought the same. Marquise Goodwin. I mean, it's like these had fast receivers. I mean, they all haven't been great, but it just was hilarious. Like you give Kyle a question like that, you're liable to have it shot down. Like what compare, like it's like, I'm not going to go through every single 40 time in the history of every receiver I've had. And you can see, and he's had some fast receivers. I think the point maybe is like productively fast receivers. Maybe this could be a group that does that. But Kyle was a little spiky. He was expansive the week before in OTAs. He was not as expansive at minicamp. I think he's ready to cut. Like he was like, let's cut this short. I don't want anyone to get hurt. Let's get everybody into the break. Let's get. He probably wants to go down to Cabo.
His quote on when he was asked directly about Jordan Watkins was interesting too, and he basically said, "Yeah, he's all right. Some good, some bad. He's doing fine."
How about when I asked him, like, was the defense ahead of the offense? And because there clearly was 3 interceptions, the ball was on the ground everywhere. He goes, "No, not really." It's just like, Kyle was not in a giving mood.
No, he wasn't receptive to any grand takeaways from the spring either. He didn't want anyone making any sweeping conclusions about what's going on.
And that's fine. That's all good. I will also point out Demarcus Robinson seems to have been the most kind of reliable receiver, at least in the spring. But as we know, he's a veteran. He's been in the Rams system. Clearly, there's reasons why he'd do that. Certainly not a speedster, but it looks like a guy that if you need him to cross the linebacker's face to get 8 yards, he's a guy who can do that. But DUI last season, it is a pending case, could be suspended. I think likely to be suspended at least part of the beginning of the season. So I think that's part of like, hey, there's going to be snaps for other guys, at least to start the season. Maybe it's Ayuk, Jennings, and Robinson just go, that might be the threesome most of the time later in the season, but we don't know that, any of those guys presuming Jennings will be okay. We don't know on that, but he wasn't there in OTAs. I guess my other grand takeaway from OTAs and minicamp, people will know where I'm going with this. I know Shanahan said most of those guys he ticked off when you asked him about all these players who weren't practicing are precautionary, or many of them precautionary. They're likely to be fine to start training camp, but it's just something when you have all these and draft choices. Barrows draft choices were not out there. Michael Williams, Alfred Collins, there's just, you don't know if these guys can get through a camp, and not being able to get out there for most of the stuff, the team drills for sure, into a mini camp makes me say, okay, let's see them put the hats on and pads on and see them get through some training camp. That's why Saleh kept saying, I don't know. We'll have to see when they put the pads on. I don't know. We'll have to see when training camp is beginning. You don't know. And then them not getting through a spring, again, precautionary. I'm sure most of these guys could have practiced, but Ricky Pearsall again in spring, not making it through. I would just raise that this is a thin team. This is definitely a thin team at a bunch of positions. We've talked about this all spring going into the summer, and you don't know if they have depth of those guys. You just don't know. And not making it through OTAs when they're not banging into each other, when they're not in contact, is a little bit of I wouldn't say a red flag, but I'd say a magenta flag. Like it's like let's just hold our horses on these players. I think Michael Williams is going to be a really good player, but he did not make it through 2 OTAs. Let's just see.